The great crystal hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with angry voices as alien delegates from across the galaxy gathered for what they did not know would be their last normal council meeting. Ambassador Wu Jin sat quietly in the human section, his dark eyes watching the chaos unfold around him while his fingers drummed silently on the smooth surface of his chair. 300 years of this same routine had worn deep lines into his face and deeper frustration into his heart. The Kalari delegate Velthar slammed his four-armed body against his speaking podium, his blue skin turning darker with rage as he shouted demands at the assembled crowd. His people's trade routes were under constant attack by pirates, and he wanted human engineers to build new defense platforms around every major shipping lane in Kalari space. The cost would be enormous, and the work would take human crews away from dozens of other critical projects across the galaxy, but Velthar did not care about such details. Queen Sil'ara of the Zephyrians rose gracefully from her floating throne, her crystalline wings catching the artificial light and throwing rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. Her voice rang like silver bells as she spoke, but her words carried the weight of absolute command. Her homeworld was dying from some strange disease that was killing all plant life, and she demanded that human terraforming teams abandon their current work on 12 other worlds to save her people immediately. The mechanical voice of Cognis Prime crackled through speakers embedded in every wall, calculating aloud that human labor efficiency needed to increase by exactly 203.7% to meet all current galactic demands. The artificial intelligence that spoke for the entire Cognis collective had determined that humans were simply not working hard enough to maintain galactic civilization properly. Wu Jin had heard these same complaints and demands countless times before. Every alien species in the galaxy had grown so dependent on human expertise that they could no longer solve even simple problems without calling for human help. Human engineers maintained the hyperspace networks that connected all star systems. Human diplomats settled every major dispute between alien races. Human scientists solved crises that threatened entire worlds. Human doctors treated diseases that alien medicine could not cure. Human teachers educated alien children when their own educational systems failed. But today was different because of what Dr. Ha Newell had discovered 3 days ago in the deepest archives of the Council's communication systems. She had been researching historical patterns of galactic crises for her xenobiology studies when she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden in classified files that required the highest security clearances to access were communications between various alien governments dating back over 2 centuries. The files revealed a conspiracy so vast and so carefully planned that Ha Newell could barely believe what she was reading. The alien races had been deliberately creating many of the crises that humans were called upon to solve. Trade route attacks were often staged by the very governments that requested human protection. Environmental disasters were sometimes caused by alien corporations that knew human terraforming teams would be sent to fix the damage. Even some of the wars between alien species were carefully orchestrated conflicts designed to require human mediation. The conspiracy had not been born from malice, but from fear and laziness. As humans proved themselves capable of solving increasingly complex problems, alien governments found it easier to rely on human solutions rather than developing their own capabilities. Over time, this reliance became so complete that many alien species literally forgot how to handle their own affairs. Rather than admit their helplessness, they began manufacturing crises to ensure that humans would always be needed and available. Dr. Ha Newell had spent 3 sleepless days confirming her findings before presenting them to the human leadership. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The galaxy had turned humanity into a servant race, not through conquest, but through deliberate dependency. Every human in the galaxy was working constantly to solve problems that aliens either created themselves or could solve if they simply tried. Now Wu Jin sat in the council chamber listening to the same demands he had heard for decades. But this time he knew the truth behind them. Queen Sil'ara's dying homeworld had been poisoned by her own industrial corporations who knew humans would be called to fix it. Velthar's pirate attacks were being funded by rival Kalari factions who wanted to force their government to request more human military installations. The Cognis Collective's calculations were designed to push humans to work beyond sustainable levels. The ambassador waited patiently as the shouting continued around him. Other human representatives sat equally still in their assigned seats, all of them having received the same briefing about Dr. Hanul's discoveries. They had made their decision as a species 3 days ago, and now it was time to act on it. When the formal speaking period began, Wu Jin rose slowly to his feet. The chamber fell silent, as it always did when humans spoke, because every alien in the room knew that human words usually meant solutions to their problems. They waited expectantly for Wu Jin to announce which human teams would be dispatched to handle their various crises. Instead, Wu Jin spoke quietly and clearly into the sudden silence. He informed the assembled delegates that humanity was withdrawing from all galactic commitments, effective immediately. All human personnel would be recalled from their positions throughout alien space. All human-maintained systems would be transferred to local control. All human diplomatic missions would be terminated. All human aid programs would cease operation. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. For several long moments, no one moved or spoke as the implications began to sink in. Then the chaos erupted all at once as every delegate began shouting questions and demands and threats. They could not understand what humanity thought it was doing. They could not comprehend how the galaxy would function without human intervention. They had never considered the possibility that their servants might simply walk away. Wu Jin waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. He explained that humanity had discovered the truth about the manufactured crises and deliberate dependency. He stated that humans would no longer enable alien helplessness by solving problems that aliens should handle themselves. He announced that human ships were already beginning their departure from Council space, and that no amount of pleading or threatening would change this decision. The reaction was immediate and desperate. Velthar promised to triple human compensation. For defense services, Queen Sil'ara offered to make humans equal partners in Zephyrian government. The Cognos Collective calculated generous new benefit packages for human workers. None of them seemed to understand that this was not a negotiation. As Wu Jin walked out of the chamber, followed by every other human representative, the aliens were left staring at each other in growing panic. Within hours, reports began coming in from across the galaxy as human ships departed their stations and human personnel abandoned their posts. The great machine of galactic civilization shuddered as its most essential components began shutting down one by one. Dr. Hanul stood on the observation deck of the human transport ship Rising Dawn as it pulled away from Nexus Prime, watching the Crystal City shrink behind them. She had started this chain of events with her discovery, and she felt both satisfaction and sadness as she observed the beginning of the end. The galaxy would have to learn to stand on its own feet now, or it would fall. Either outcome would be better than the lie they had all been living. Captain Do-hyun stood on the bridge of his cargo vessel, Serenity's Edge, staring at the communication console that had not stopped flashing with incoming distress signals for the past 6 months. Every few minutes brought another desperate plea from some alien world begging for human assistance, and every few minutes Do-hyun followed his orders and deleted the message without responding. The weight of those ignored cries for help pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. But he had made his choice along with the rest of humanity. The industrial world of Pharaoh VII had been one of the first to send distress calls. Their massive automated factories that produced starship components for half the galaxy had been designed and built by human engineers over a century ago, with human technicians maintaining the complex systems ever since. The Ferozi had never bothered to learn how their own industrial infrastructure actually worked, content to let humans handle all the technical details while they focused on management and profit. When the human maintenance crews departed Pharaoh VII, the factory systems continued running normally for exactly 17 days. Then the first critical failure occurred in the primary power distribution network, and engineer Toxlan found himself staring at diagnostic readouts filled with symbols and numbers he could not understand. The human technicians had always handled power system problems, leaving detailed repair logs that were written in technical language no Ferozi had ever bothered to learn. Toxlan tried everything he could think of to restore power to Factory, Complex 7. He pressed buttons and adjusted settings based on his best guesses about what the mysterious symbols might mean. He consulted the technical manuals left behind by the human crews, but the instructions were written for people who understood advanced engineering principles that no Ferozi had ever studied. Within 3 days, his random attempts at repair had caused a cascade failure that shut down the entire factory complex permanently. The pattern repeated itself across Pharaoh 7 as more systems failed and Feroci engineers proved completely unable to fix them. The automated assembly lines that had run perfectly for decades ground to a halt as their control computers crashed and no one knew how to restart them. The environmental systems that kept the factory cities habitable began breaking down as their maintenance cycles failed. The transportation networks that moved raw materials and finished goods between facilities stopped functioning when their routing algorithms encountered errors that required human-level problem-solving to resolve. Within 4 months of the human departure, Pharaoh 7 had gone from being one of the galaxy's most important industrial centers to a collection of silent factories filled with useless machinery that no one knew how to operate. Toxland stood in the abandoned control room of his former workplace, surrounded by dark screens and dead computers, finally understanding how completely his people had surrendered their independence to human expertise. The Aquarian depths faced an even more immediate crisis when a plague began spreading through their underwater cities just 2 weeks after the human medical teams departed. The disease attacked the nervous systems of Aquarians, causing paralysis and death within days of infection. Dr. Aquanina recognized the symptoms from her medical training, but the treatment required specialized equipment and drugs that only human pharmaceutical companies knew how to manufacture. Aquanina tried to send urgent messages to human medical facilities requesting emergency assistance, but the deep space communication arrays that connected her world to the broader galaxy had been built and maintained by human technicians. Without regular maintenance, the delicate quantum entanglement systems that allowed faster-than-light communication began drifting out of alignment. Her distress calls reached the relay stations but were distorted beyond recognition by the failing equipment. As the communication systems degraded further, the Aquarian depths became completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Aquanina watched helplessly as the plague spread through her people while her calls for help vanished into the cosmic void. She tried desperately to synthesize the needed medications using Aquarian technology, but her people's medical knowledge was centuries behind human standards. Every experimental treatment failed, and the death toll continued to rise. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part of their suffering. Aquanina knew that human medical experts could easily cure the plague if they knew about it, but the failing communication systems meant that her people were dying in silence while the galaxy remained unaware of their plight. The Aquarians had traded their technological independence for the convenience of human-maintained infrastructure, and now that infrastructure was failing when they needed it most. Administrator So Young reviewed the scout reports aboard the human colony ship New Horizon, documenting the cascade of failures spreading across alien space. Her job was to monitor the situation and provide regular updates to the human leadership about how the various alien species were handling their sudden independence. The reports painted a picture of civilizations collapsing under the weight of their own helplessness. The Galactic Council itself had proven completely unable to function without human mediators. What had started as a simple trade dispute between the Silicari and Drexoni had escalated into system-wide warfare within 3 months of humanity's departure. Both species had become so accustomed to having humans resolve their disagreements that they had forgotten how to compromise or negotiate on their own. The Silicari accused the Drexoni of violating shipping contracts, while the Drexoni claimed the Silicari were trying to impose unfair trade restrictions. In the past, human diplomats would have analyzed the situation, identified the underlying issues, and guided both sides toward a mutually acceptable solution. Without human intervention, each side simply assumed the other was acting in bad faith and escalated their responses accordingly. Small skirmishes over disputed shipping routes grew into battles between patrol fleets. Trade embargoes expanded into blockades of entire star systems. Propaganda campaigns turned into cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure. Within 6 months, 2 species that had coexisted peacefully for centuries were locked in a destructive war that neither really wanted, but neither knew how to stop. Similar conflicts erupted throughout former Council space as alien governments discovered they could not resolve even minor disagreements without external mediation. Species that had relied on human diplomats for generations found themselves unable to communicate effectively with their neighbors. Trade relationships that had seemed stable for centuries fell apart when routine contract disputes could not be resolved peacefully. Pirates and warlords quickly moved to exploit the chaos, seizing control of failed shipping routes and abandoned installations. The lawless regions that had once been contained by human-coordinated security forces expanded rapidly as local governments proved unable to maintain order. Criminal organizations that had been minor nuisances became major threats as the infrastructure, supporting galactic law enforcement, crumbled. Dr. Ha-Newell continued her research aboard the vessel Curiosity, documenting the collapse with scientific precision while struggling with her own emotions about what her discovery had set in motion. She had known that revealing the conspiracy would lead to humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. But even she had not anticipated how quickly 3 centuries of civilization would unravel. Her latest reports showed that approximately 60% of the galaxy's critical infrastructure was already non-functional, with failure rates accelerating as cascade effects spread through interconnected systems. Transportation networks were fragmenting as relay stations went offline. Communication systems were degrading as maintenance cycles failed. Power grids were failing as automated systems encountered errors that required human-level intelligence to resolve. The most disturbing aspect of the collapse was how many alien species seemed incapable of even attempting to solve their own problems. Rather than trying to learn how to maintain their infrastructure, many governments simply declared emergencies and waited for help that would never come. Some species had become so dependent on human problem-solving that they appeared to have lost the ability to think creatively about challenges. Ha-Newell understood that this period of collapse was necessary for the galaxy's long-term health. But watching entire civilizations crumble under the weight of their own dependency was more painful than she had expected. She had helped free humanity from exploitation, but the cost was being paid by billions of innocent aliens who had been failed by their own leaders' short-sighted policies. As the Curiosity continued its journey through the failing galaxy, Ha-Newell wondered whether the alien species would find the strength to rebuild themselves, or whether they would simply fade into extinction. The next few years would determine whether humanity's departure had been a gift that forced the galaxy to grow stronger, or a catastrophe that marked the end of galactic civilization itself. Commander Rock-Har stood in the command center of his flagship Inevitable Victory, watching his massive fleet struggle through hyperspace toward the Sol system while sparks flew from overloaded control panels around him. 2 years of constant breakdowns had turned what should have been the most powerful armada in galactic history into a desperate collection of barely functional warships held together by alien stubbornness and increasingly creative repairs. His engineers had done their best to maintain the vessels without human technical support, but their best efforts were clearly not enough. The Drexoni Empire had assembled this fleet from ships contributed by 17 different alien species, all united in their determination to force humanity back to their rightful place as galactic servants. Rock-Har commanded vessels from the Kalari, Zephyrians, Feroci, Aquarians, and a dozen other races. But the mixed technologies created constant compatibility problems that human technicians had always solved in the past. Now, alien engineers struggled with systems they did not fully understand, trying to make equipment from different civilizations work together without proper technical documentation. The hyperspace jump that should have taken 3 days had stretched into 2 weeks as ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel due to engine failures. The Kalari destroyers suffered from power distribution problems that caused random system shutdowns. The Zephyrian cruisers had navigation, computers that crashed whenever they tried to calculate complex jump coordinates. The Feroci battleships were losing structural integrity as their automated repair systems malfunctioned without proper maintenance. Rock-Har had started this journey with 850 ships, but mechanical failures had forced him to abandon over 200 vessels along the route. Some had suffered complete engine failures and been left drifting in empty space. Others had experienced life support breakdowns that required their crews to be evacuated to other ships. A few had simply disappeared during hyperspace jumps when their navigation systems failed catastrophically. Admiral Jae Sung monitored the approaching alien fleet from the command center of Luna Station, watching their ragged progress with a mixture of professional interest and personal sadness. The human defense fleet waited in perfect formation around Earth's moon, their sleek ships powered by technology that had advanced far beyond anything the aliens possessed. While the galaxy had spent centuries becoming dependent on human expertise, Humanity had used that same time to secretly develop capabilities that made their former masters look like primitive barbarians. The contrast was striking even at this distance. Human vessels maintained perfect formation with computer precision, while the alien fleet straggled across millions of kilometers of space like a wounded animal. Human ships showed no signs of mechanical stress, despite having traveled much farther, while alien vessels leaked atmosphere and energy from failing systems. Human technology worked flawlessly because it had been designed by people who understood it completely, while alien equipment failed constantly because it had been built by humans for users who never learned how it actually functioned. President Minho addressed the United Earth government from his office in Geneva, laying out the critical decision that would determine humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. The approaching alien fleet represented everything wrong with the old system, where aliens demanded human solutions to problems they refused to solve themselves. Defeating them through violence would be easy, but it would also teach the wrong lesson about power and responsibility. Minho explained to the assembled representatives that humanity had moved far beyond the crude weapons and simple technologies that the aliens understood. Human science had unlocked the fundamental forces of reality itself, allowing them to manipulate matter and energy in ways that would seem like magic to their former masters. The alien fleet posed no real threat to human civilization. But how? Humanity responded to that fleet would shape the future of the galaxy. The president proposed demonstrating just how far beyond their former servants humanity had evolved. Rather than destroying the alien ships, they would disable them completely while causing no casualties. The aliens would be forced to confront the reality that their former servants had become something far beyond their comprehension, and that violence would never again be an option for controlling human behavior. The engagement began when the alien fleet finally reached the outer edge of the Sol system after 3 weeks of mechanical difficulties. Rokhar ordered his ships to attack formation, but nearly a third of his vessels failed to respond due to communication system failures. The remaining ships struggled to coordinate their assault as their targeting computers crashed and their weapons systems experienced power fluctuations. Admiral Jae-sung watched the pathetic display with growing sadness before giving the order to begin the demonstration. Human ships moved with impossible speed and precision, appearing and disappearing around the alien fleet like ghosts made of light and steel. Their weapons did not fire destructive beams or explosive projectiles, but instead projected fields of energy that simply turned off alien technology with surgical precision. The battle lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Rokhar watched in growing horror as his ships lost all power one by one, their weapons refusing to fire, their shields offering no protection, their engines responding only when the humans allowed them to function. His flagship's main computers displayed error messages in languages his crew could not read, while backup systems activated and deactivated seemingly at random. When the inevitable victory lost all power and began drifting helplessly through space, Rokhar realized that his fleet had not been defeated in battle, but had instead been systematically shut down like obsolete machinery. None of his ships had been destroyed, and none of his crew members had been killed, but every vessel in his armada now floated powerless in the void, while human ships moved around them like shepherds managing a flock of helpless animals. The human boarding parties that arrived on the inevitable victory moved with calm efficiency, their advanced equipment allowing them to restore life support and basic systems while keeping weapons and engines offline. Rokhar found himself face-to-face with Admiral Jae-sung in his own command center, trying to maintain some dignity while surrounded by technology that had proven utterly useless against human capabilities. Jae-sung spoke to the defeated commander with quiet respect, offering medical assistance for wounded crew members and promising safe passage home for all survivors. He explained that the human fleet could have destroyed every alien ship in minutes without suffering a single casualty, but that violence was not the lesson humanity wanted to teach. Instead, they wanted the galaxy to understand that the age of alien demands and human compliance was over forever. The Admiral presented Rokhar with a message for the Galactic Council and all alien governments. Humanity would not be returning to fix the galaxy's problems or maintain alien infrastructure or solve alien disputes. The aliens had proven they could organize military expeditions and coordinate fleet actions when they were motivated to do so, which meant they were perfectly capable of handling their own affairs when they stopped expecting others to do the work for them. Jae Sung explained that human technology had advanced to levels that made alien science look like stone tools compared to quantum computers. Humanity could now manipulate reality at the subatomic level, travel instantly across galactic distances, and solve problems that alien minds could not even comprehend. The gap between human and alien capabilities had grown so vast that any attempt to use force against humanity would be like insects trying to threaten a star. But despite their overwhelming superiority, humans had no desire to conquer or rule over alien species. They wanted nothing more than to be left alone to pursue their own development while the galaxy learned to stand on its own feet. The choice facing alien civilizations was simple: grow up and become truly independent, or continue collapsing under the weight of their own helplessness. As the disabled alien fleet began its long journey home with human-provided emergency repairs, word spread throughout the galaxy that humanity had become something far beyond what anyone had imagined. The former servants had evolved into beings of nearly godlike power, and they wanted nothing more to do with their former masters. The age of human dependency was over, and the aliens would have to find their own way forward in a universe that no longer revolved around their needs and demands. Scientist Corvin stood in his rebuilt laboratory on Nexus Prime, examining the crystalline power core that his team had finally managed to construct after 5 years of desperate experimentation. The device was crude compared to human technology and would need constant maintenance to function properly, but it represented something far more valuable than mere engineering. It was proof that the Nexari could solve their own problems when they had no other choice. The years following humanity's departure had been brutal for most alien species, but those who survived the initial collapse had discovered capabilities within themselves that centuries of human dependency had allowed them to forget. The Nexari had been among the first to abandon their futile attempts at repairing human-built systems, and instead focus on developing technologies they could actually understand and maintain. Corvin's power core used principles of crystal resonance that were completely different from human energy systems, but it worked reliably within the limitations of Nexari science. His people had formed alliances with other survivor species, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that the old Galactic Council had never encouraged. The Aquarians contributed their expertise in biological systems, while the reformed Feroci offered their industrial capabilities, and the mountain-dwelling Karathi provided rare minerals needed for advanced manufacturing. This cooperation had emerged naturally from necessity, rather than being imposed by human mediators. Each species brought their own strengths to solve shared problems, creating solutions that no single race could have achieved alone. The new technologies they developed were often inferior to human designs in terms of raw efficiency, but they had one crucial advantage: the aliens actually understood how they worked. On the oceanic world of Hydros, healer Aquanina walked slowly through the memorial gardens that had been built to honor the millions of her people who had died during the plague years. The crystalline monuments caught the filtered sunlight streaming down through the water, casting dancing patterns of light across the carefully tended coral formations that served as living gravestones for the victims of alien helplessness. Aquanina had aged decades in the 5 years since humanity's departure, her once smooth skin now marked with the scars and stress lines of a leader who had guided her people through their darkest period. The plague that had seemed unstoppable when human medical support disappeared had finally been conquered through desperate cooperation between Aquarian healers and refugee scientists from a dozen other worlds. The cure had not come from advanced human pharmaceuticals, but from a combination of traditional Aquarian herbal medicine, Zephyrian biochemistry, and Nexari energy treatments that worked together in ways no single medical tradition could have achieved. The process of developing this cure had taken 3 years and cost millions of lives, but it had taught the survivors that they were capable of solving problems that had seemed impossible. More importantly, the experience had fundamentally changed how the survivor species approached challenges. Instead of immediately looking for external help, they now instinctively sought ways to combine their different capabilities and knowledge bases. The Aquarians had become the galaxy's leading experts in biological adaptation, while their alliance partners had developed complementary specializations in other fields. But not all alien species had chosen the path of cooperation and self-improvement. War Marshal Velthanor of the Kalari Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship conquest, surveying the slave labor camps that had been constructed on the ruins of Pharos VII. His people had decided that if they could not create what humanity had once provided, they would simply take it by force from weaker species. The Kalari had always been among the more aggressive races in the galaxy, but their military traditions had been constrained by human peacekeeping efforts and diplomatic intervention. With humanity gone, Velthanor had convinced his people that strength was the only virtue that mattered in the new galactic order. If other species were too weak to defend their territory and resources, then they deserved to be conquered and enslaved. The Kalari Empire had grown rapidly by seizing human-built installations and forcing captured alien technicians to operate them at gunpoint. Velthanor's forces controlled nearly a dozen star systems, ruling through fear and brutality while extracting maximum productivity from their enslaved populations. The technology they controlled was gradually failing without proper maintenance, but they could always capture more systems and more slaves to replace what was lost. Velthanor believed that the Kalari approach represented the only realistic response to humanity's abandonment of the galaxy. The weak would serve the strong, just as both had once served humanity. The only difference was that Kalari masters were willing to use violence to maintain control, while humans had relied on alien guilt and dependency to ensure compliance. The War Marshal's empire represented everything wrong with the old galactic system, but concentrated into a more honest form of exploitation. Instead of hiding behind pretenses of mutual benefit and cooperation, the Kalari simply took what they wanted and enslaved anyone too weak to resist. It was brutal and unsustainable, but it allowed them to maintain their lifestyle without having to learn new skills or develop genuine independence. Deep in human space, Dr. Hanul existed now as something that would have been incomprehensible to her former self. Her consciousness had been freed from biological limitations through humanity's mastery of quantum mechanics and information theory, allowing her to experience reality from perspectives that transcended physical existence. She could observe events across the galaxy simultaneously, analyze probability chains that stretched across decades, and understand the fundamental patterns underlying all complex systems. From her enhanced perspective, Ha-Nul could see the long-term consequences of humanity's withdrawal with perfect clarity. The galaxy was dividing itself into three distinct categories: the species that had learned to cooperate and grow stronger through adversity, the species that had chosen to exploit others rather than develop themselves, and the failed civilizations that had simply collapsed under the weight of their own helplessness. The cooperative species like the Nexari Alliance were developing sustainable technologies and social systems that would eventually make them truly independent. They would never again need external help to solve their problems, and their children would grow up in societies that valued self-reliance and mutual support over dependence on outside saviors. The exploitative species, like the Kalari Empire, were following a path that led inevitably to destruction. Their conquests might provide short-term benefits, but they were not developing the capabilities needed for long-term survival. Eventually, their stolen technology would fail completely, their enslaved populations would rebel, and their empire would collapse into chaos and violence. The failed civilizations had already passed the point of no return. Without human support to maintain their basic infrastructure, they had reverted to primitive conditions or simply gone extinct. Their collapse served as a warning to other species about the consequences of complete dependency on external problem-solving. Ambassador Wu Jin, now existing as a quantum consciousness that could manifest anywhere in the galaxy, observed these developments with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Humanity's withdrawal had been necessary to break the cycle of alien dependency, but the transition period was proving more painful and destructive than even the most pessimistic human projections had predicted. The test facing the galaxy was fundamentally simple. Could alien species learn to solve their own problems and cooperate with each other? Or would they continue expecting others to handle their difficulties for them? Those who passed the test would emerge stronger and more capable than they had ever been under human guidance. Those who failed would serve as examples of what happened to civilizations that refused to grow up. Wu Jin understood that humanity's role in this process was nearly complete. They had removed themselves as enablers of alien helplessness and demonstrated that force would not bring them back. The next phase would determine whether the galaxy's survivors had learned the right lessons from their ordeal, or whether they would need even harder experiences to finally achieve genuine independence and maturity. Emperor Velthanor sat on his throne built from the wreckage of Council worlds, commanding fleets of barely functional warships, while his enslaved alien technicians struggled to maintain systems they could never fully understand. 10 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galaxy, and the Kalari Empire now controlled nearly a third of known space through fear, violence, and the ruthless exploitation of weaker species who had failed to adapt to their new reality. The throne. Room aboard his flagship Domination was a monument to Kalari's superiority over the lesser races that served them. Captured alien engineers worked at control stations under the watchful eyes of armed guards, their movements monitored by sensors that would trigger immediate execution if they showed any signs of sabotage or rebellion. The walls were decorated, with trophies taken from conquered worlds, crystalline artwork from Nexus Prime, golden sculptures from the Aquarian depths, and technological components from dozens of other civilizations. But beneath the displays of power and dominance, Velthanor knew that his empire was slowly crumbling from within. The human-built technology that formed the foundation of Kalari military superiority was failing faster than his enslaved technicians could repair it. Each battle cost him ships that could not be properly replaced, and each conquered world required more resources to control than it provided in return. The Empire was consuming itself to maintain the illusion of strength. The Free Alliance had emerged as the Kalari Empire's primary rival, controlling another third of the galaxy through genuine cooperation between species that had learned to solve their own problems. Corvin now served as the Alliance's chief coordinator, working from a rebuilt Nexus Prime that had become a symbol of alien independence and mutual support. His laboratory had grown into a vast research complex where scientists from dozens of species collaborated on projects that no single race could have completed alone. The Alliance had developed technologies that were uniquely their own, combining the best aspects of different alien approaches to create solutions that worked within their actual capabilities. Their ships were slower than human vessels had been, their weapons less powerful, their computers less sophisticated, but everything they built was designed by people who understood it completely and could maintain it indefinitely without outside help. More importantly, the Alliance had created social and political systems based on genuine equality and shared responsibility. Each member species contributed according to their strengths while receiving support for their weaknesses, but no one was allowed to become dependent on others for their basic survival and development. The lessons learned during the collapse. Years had been written into the Alliance's founding principles. Healer Aquanina had become one of the Alliance's most respected leaders, her experience guiding the Aquarians through the plague years having taught her valuable lessons about crisis, management, and long-term planning. She worked now from a floating city that moved between Alliance worlds, providing medical support and disaster relief wherever they were needed most. Her people had become the galaxy's experts in biological adaptation and emergency response. The remaining third of the galaxy was chaos, failed states, dead worlds, and lawless regions where only the strongest survived. These were the civilizations that had proven incapable of adapting to independence, either collapsing completely or devolving into primitive barbarism. Their territories served as a constant reminder of what happened to societies that refused to take responsibility for their own development. Admiral Jae Sung manifested as a quantum consciousness in the slave labor camp on Pharos 7th, his enhanced perception allowing him to observe the brutal conditions under which captured alien technicians were forced to maintain machinery they barely understood. The sight of engineer Toxlan, now ancient and broken after years of forced labor, struggling to repair systems with salvaged parts, stirred emotions that humanity had thought they had moved beyond. The old Feroci engineer had become a symbol of everything wrong with both the old system and the new tyranny that had replaced it. Under human guidance, Toxlan had been content to let others handle all technical challenges while he focused on management responsibilities. Under Kalari rule, he was forced to attempt repairs he had never learned to perform while facing execution. If he failed to produce results, Jae-sung understood that the Kalari Empire represented the worst possible outcome of the galaxy's failure to mature beyond its need for external solutions. Instead of learning independence, they had simply replaced human problem-solving with the exploitation of other aliens who were equally helpless. The cycle of dependency had not been broken, but had instead become more obviously brutal and unsustainable. President Yoo-jin, Minho's successor as leader of the human government, faced the ultimate test of humanity's principles as reports of Kalari atrocities reached Earth through quantum communication networks. The evolved human collective could easily crush the Empire and restore order to the galaxy, but doing so would simply recreate the old pattern of alien dependence on human solutions to alien problems. Instead, Yoo-jin proposed something that had never been attempted in galactic history: limited intervention designed not to solve the galaxy's problems, but to give capable aliens the tools they needed to solve those problems themselves. Humanity would share carefully selected knowledge with the Free Alliance, not as solutions to specific challenges, but as methods for developing solutions independently. Human agents began appearing throughout Alliance territory, but not as the conquering saviors or wise mediators that aliens remembered from the past. Ambassador Woo-jin materialized in Corvin's laboratory on Nexus Prime, offering not answers to specific technical problems, but guidance on how to ask better questions and develop more effective research methodologies. The knowledge shared was designed to enhance alien capabilities without creating new dependencies. The process was slow and careful, with humans providing just enough assistance to accelerate Alliance development without taking over their problem-solving processes. Alliance scientists learned to combine human theoretical insights with their own practical experience, creating hybrid approaches that were both more effective than pure alien methods and more comprehensible than pure human technology. The final confrontation came when Emperor Velthanor launched a massive offensive against the Free Alliance, intent on claiming the last human-built installations in Alliance space before they could be fully replaced with alien-designed alternatives. The Kalari fleet was larger than ever before, but it was also more fragile, held together by increasingly desperate repairs and the forced labor of enslaved technicians who had no loyalty to their captors. Velthanor commanded the assault personally, from his flagship Domination, leading a dreadnought fleet cobbled together from the military technologies of a dozen conquered civilizations. His strategy was simple: overwhelm the Alliance forces through sheer numbers while capturing as many human-built installations as possible before they could be destroyed or sabotaged. The Alliance fleet that met the Kalari Armada in the ruins of the old council chambers was smaller but fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen before. These were ships designed and built by aliens who understood every component and system, crewed by people who had chosen to serve rather than being forced into military service, and commanded by leaders who had learned to think strategically, rather than simply following human guidance. Corvin led the Alliance forces from his flagship Cooperation, implementing tactics that combined human strategic insights with uniquely alien approaches to space combat. The battle was fierce and bloody, with both sides taking heavy casualties, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Alliance ships were maintained by people who understood them completely, while the Kalari vessels were falling apart under the stress of combat. Admiral Jae-sung observed the engagement from quantum space, watching with satisfaction as Corvin demonstrated that aliens could defeat other aliens without human intervention. The Alliance victory sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, proving for the first time in centuries that spacefaring civilizations could resolve their own conflicts through their own capabilities and determination. The Kalari Empire fragmented. Within months, as enslaved species rose in rebellion, inspired by proof that they did not have to accept oppression as inevitable. Velthanor himself was captured during the retreat from Nexus Prime, his flagship disabled by weapons that had been designed specifically to counter Kalari military technology. Instead of executing the former emperor, the Alliance offered him something unprecedented: education. Yoo-jin herself manifested before the fallen tyrant, explaining that humanity had learned long ago that punishment without understanding created only more suffering and violence. Velthanor was given the opportunity to learn why his approach had failed and how he might contribute to building something better. The new Galactic Council that formed on Nexus Prime operated according to principles that had been learned through hard experience rather than inherited from human example. Species that had once demanded human solutions now worked together to address shared challenges.